go. Welcome to another one of our UDC Jazz Forums. My name is Michael Fitzgerald. I'm the Electronic Services Librarian here at UDC. And without further ado, please welcome Rusty Hassan from WPFW and our special guest, UDC's own Steve Novosel.
Well, thank you, Michael. Boy, this is a real treat for me tonight, a real special occasion to be up here talking with Steve Novosel, whom I've known, I guess it's been over 40 years.
At least.
Part of it, probably more.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I think we can hear. Yeah, we got you
all
loud
right.
and clear,
Okay,
Steve.
good.
And, I guess why don't we go back to the beginning, how you got involved in listening to jazz and performing jazz, and why the bass?
Well, you're going back to my childhood.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
Well, I got I was a trumpet player, number one.
Okay.
And I got my trumpet in the 5th grade.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Where was this?
This is in Pennsylvania, a place called Farrell, Pennsylvania. And me and my buddy got our trumpets. We're going to play with the band, right, the first day. And we got our trumpets, and by the time we got out of school that day, we were sitting on the curb trying to play the hucklebuck.
Haha, okay.
Yeah. And that's when I started playing trumpet and also playing the piano. My grandfather played the piano, and he used to work in the steel mill and come home and drunk and wake everybody up in the house, and I used to sit on his lap and learn to play the piano. So that's how I started. The bass came much later.
Mm-hmm. And what got you into the bass?
Well, what got me into the bass was that same guy, my buddy, was also a trumpet player. And we were going to run away from home when we were in high school. But I chickened out and he went, right? And he joined the Army, and I didn't see him for several years later. Come to find out, he became a bass player, you know? And, of course, later on when I started playing the bass, I was in one of the Army bands, the 75th Army Band at Fort Belvoir. And I was there in 1961 as a trumpet player. I came to the Washington area, which is how I got here, to the Naval School of Music, which was located in Anacostia at that time. And went through my training course and then was stationed out at Fort Belvoir for the rest of I was in for 3 years. And played the trumpet. And I always had a deep love for the bass, you know. So one day on the bass, they needed to have a pickup dance band to play for one of the general's party. Of course, we didn't have a bass player, so I was a volunteer. You know? And that's when I started playing the bass. And you know, I was practicing all the time, you know. Being a musician, I knew music, but I had to learn to play the instrument. And during that time, after my first year of practicing and learning the instrument, I went into town. I used to come into town and check out all the music. And I go into this little club on 13th Street called the Brass Rail, where Buck Clark and Charlie Hampton were playing 6 nights a week. And my childhood bass player, trumpet player, bass player, now bass player, was playing, you know. I hadn't seen him in maybe 6 or 7 years. He was getting ready to leave the band. He was going to New York to go with Roland Kirk, right? So I sat in and played, and Buck said, "Would you like this gig, you know?" I said, "I'd love it, you know." So it gave me a chance to play the bass every night, practice on the bass, you know, and I started plugging away, man. You know?
And you were still in the service at this time?
I was still in the service. I got out in 1964. I was playing with Buck for at least a year and a half, from the end of 62 through 64 when I got out.
Who were some of the other people you would sit in at around the time while you're still in the service, coming
Well,
into
I
town?
used to go, there's a place called Coffee and Confusion.
Sure.
You probably know.
That was what
Yeah.
we used to call a beatnik hangout.
There's a beatnik
Right,
hangout,
right.
And the original beatnik
Right.
was Teddy Portachinko, if you knew his name. He was, in those days, he had an afro when there weren't no afros, you know. But he used to run that place, and he stayed open 24 hours a day. Lawrence Wheatley used to play there, guys from Baltimore, and I used to go in there and sit in, you know. And of course, there's a place on Thomas Circle called the Something Else Lounge, which was Lawrence Wheatley was there with Billy Hart, a very famous drummer from Washington, and Dwayne Austin, who was a bass player, and Donna Jewell, who was an excellent jazz singer. So I used to get around, go to the Caverns. That's when Andrew White had his the quintet, the JFK Quintet. They were working there 6, 7 nights a week, you know. So Washington was full of music.
And what was you were going to the Caverns to hear Andrew's group, but soon you started performing there. Who were some of the people you performed with at the Caverns?
Well, when I got out of the Army, the owner or part owner was Tony Taylor.
Sure.
And at that time, Bobby Timmons was living in Washington. And I got a job with Bobby Timmons, man, the great Bobby Timmons.
Now, you all should know this, but for those of you who may not, Bobby Timmons was the pianist who played with Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. And he put his stamp on the music with compositions like Moanin' and another soul influence type of approach to jazz performance, gospel influence. He put his own stamp on it. So what was Bobby like? What was he like to play?
Oh, he was a wonderful guy, you know, wonderful guy, and a great underrated musician, I thought, you know. Not only his piano playing and his compositions, you know. We were there for at least a year and a half, and we had a drummer whose brother was very famous in Washington, played with Sonny Rollins, and also with Shirley Horn, Stump Saunders.
Sure.
Stump had a brother by the name of Billy Saunders, who was part of that trio. So I was with Bobby at least a year and a half there, you know, and he took me to New York. You know, we were supposed to go on a tour, but we went straight to New York, and that was a time when duos were becoming big in New York City because of the liquor laws.
There's a cabaret type law.
Cabaret type laws, yeah.
Right, okay.
A lot of the clubs were in buildings where there were apartments above, so they had a noise ordinance type thing there, and so they started hiring duos, you know, Bradley's, the Top of the Gate, places like that. So I was with Bobby off and on in New York, you know.
While still maintaining your residence down here?
Yeah, I was still living here, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Who were some of the other folks you were working with in the 60s? It was a pretty exciting time.
The list goes on. Of course, Andrew White, I was very fortunate to meet him and be part of his music and things that he was trying to do. And we had an association for up until this day. You know, we're still very close friends. And I was very fortunate to make over 40 albums with him. 41. Yeah, made the first, almost the first. I'm off the live at the New Thing. I don't know if that was the very first. That was the second. That was the second one.
Boy. The New Thing was actually the New Thing Art and Architecture Center. And it was a cultural organization in Adams Morgan in Washington, D.C. And they used to do what Topper Carew, who was the director of the New Thing, called Jazz Workshop at St. Margaret's Church on Connecticut Avenue. And I have a real affection for the New Thing because my wife Sandra Barrett then was teaching African dance at the New Thing Art and Architecture Center. She was part of Melvin Dio's African Heritage Dancers and Drummers. And so Topper kept a performance going on at St. Margaret's. I guess it was it Tuesday nights? I know it was a weeknight.
Yeah,
you know,
I believe so.
Yeah. From that, 68, 69, in that era.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You worked with since then has become a very famous vocalist. And you were actually married to her for a while, back in the 60s. Tell us about your association with Roberta Flack.
Well, Roberta and I met Roberta through Buck Clark.
Okay.
You know, and she was just finishing up at Howard University. She was studying to be a concert pianist, you know, excellent musician. And she also did a lot of vocal coaching to a lot of operatic people, you know, singers and so forth. And we kind of clicked, you know. And it became history there. We got married around 67 and stayed together for several years.
Okay. Just around the time, I think it was on HBO this week, there's a documentary about the loving couple. The loving couple is the couple, interracial couple that had a lawsuit because interracial marriages were illegal in Virginia at the time that Steve and Roberta were married. And it was a famous lawsuit that made it all the way to the Supreme Court. So that by the time my marriage came along in '69, it was legal all over the United States. But, you know, it was an interesting time, to say the least.
It certainly was.
Steve and I, before we were on mic, we're talking about 1968 and the insurrection here in Washington, D.C. And Steve was talking about a club he was playing on Upper 14th Street. Tell us about that.
Oh, Jazzland, that was the name. It was up on 14th and Girard Street, I believe. Yeah. It was one of the you know, the local jazz clubs. They had organ groups in there and a lot of different groups. And I was in there the night Martin Luther King was shot. We were playing in there with some local guys. And to make a long story short, we took a break. And me and the piano player, who's was a very famous piano player here in Washington, Lawrence Wheatley, we affectionately called Fox. So we walked out to the car and came back and got out of the car, and 14th Street was lit up, you know, with fire and everything, man. It was a terrible time. So we're walking back to the club, and people were just on the streets breaking in just breaking into liquor stores and clothing stores and taking things and running, you know, just wild. And this guy's walking down the street and he sees me and Lawrence together, and he had a bottle in his hand. He smashed it. He said, "This is your time, Whitey." And Lawrence said, "Hold it. He's a brother." And he looked at me, and he threw it down and just kept going. But I credit Lawrence for saving my life.
Absolutely.
That night,
incredible night. Lawrence, incredible musician. I want to go back, if I got the year correctly, because I think one of the album covers we saw flashing on the screen was The Inflated Tear.
Yes.
That you did with Roland Kirk before he was Hassan Roland Kirk, and I think that was recorded in '67.
'67, yeah.
So how did you get your association with
Well,
Roland
I
Kirk?
was working here. I was working with Shirley Horn.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, during that period, and working a lot at the Caverns. I was with a group called the Trio ESP, which was myself, a drummer named Jimmy Hops, and a piano player by the name of Gene Rush. And we had a nice little trio, and we used to work opposite the big names that were coming into the Caverns. This was after the JFK. JFK put the club on the map.
Sure.
And which enabled Tony and Angelo to start bringing in name groups, you know. So we used to be like the second band, you know, would alternate sets. And so I played there with many people. Eddie Harris, who came in for like 6 months at a time as artist in residence, you know, there. And of course, I played with Shirley in there, a lot of local people, you know. And so while I'm playing with Shirley, Roland comes in and hires Jimmy. He liked Jimmy's playing. And 2 weeks later, I get the call from Roland, you know. So I had to tell Shirley, bye. Time for me to go.
Okay, yeah.
And that's when I joined Roland. I was with him for about 3 years. And the Inflated Tear was, like you said, 67, I believe. And we had a quartet, and I traveled the world with him. You know, we went to everywhere on this planet, you know, with that group.
Now, what was it like musically for you? You know, transitioning from working like with Shirley Horn doing vocals to someone who's so cutting edge.
Right.
You know, like the Inflated Tear itself is so
Yeah.
in your face. What was that like for you?
Oh, it was.
get into it?
Look, I cherish those days because it was so challenging, and being able to play with musicians that made you rise to the occasion. You know, it was always a challenge with him. Because you never knew what he was going to play. You know, you get on the bandstand. When I joined my first night with Roland, matter of fact, it was in Newark, New Jersey, and there was a riot there that night. And the piano player was late. So it was just me and Jimmy and Roland. And he pulled out his clarinet and started playing some Dixieland. I had no idea what he was going to play, you know. And then he'd turn around and play some Coltrane, you know. He was such a versatile player. And he was Mr. Music for me.
Sure, okay.
You know, at that period of my life, you know. It was always a challenge, and it was just great playing with him, you know.
What was he like off the stand when you weren't performing?
Well, I could tell you some stories. Well, one thing that I always marveled at Roland was I always thought he could see, you know. As one example, we're in England and getting off the plane, and we're all in a cab, and give the people the address, give the cabbie the address, and we're driving down the streets of London, and Roland said, "Hey, cabbie, you missed a turn." And the rest of the band, what's he talking about? And he actually did. He said, "You got to go back another couple of blocks. You got to turn left there."
Oh my goodness.
I said, "Now, how did he know that?" You know, he had that sixth sense. He could. Oh man, he was amazing with that. One night we're playing in the Village Vanguard, and towards the end of the set, he got on the microphone, and I just happened to notice, if you know the Village Vanguard, there's a stairway that comes down, if it's still the same way. And people, you pay your fee right at the door. And standing in the doorway was Dewey Redman. If everybody knows who Dewey Redman was, he was the father of the famous Joshua Redman, who's also a saxophone player. And Dewey was playing with Ornette Coleman in those days. And now Dewey is just standing there getting ready to walk in. And Roland gets on the microphone and says, "Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, blah, blah, blah. And we'd like to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Dewey Redman."
Oh, gee. Boy.
And, I mean, he didn't know that.
That's phenomenal.
And every time I saw Dewey after that, he would say, "Steve, how did you know that I was there?" You know?
Jeez.
He had that 6 cents.
Boy, that's incredible. Now you brought a clip of
Yeah,
Roland
would you
Kirk
like to
playing.
play it?
So why don't we play that now, since we're talking about it?
This was in 1967. We were playing in Prague, Czechoslovakia. And this was just supposed to be a concert. And in 1990s, here comes this video that came out, not known to anyone. A friend of mine called me and said, I have a video of you in Prague. I said, what kind of video? We didn't make a video.
Oh, okay.
But it's a good example of bootleg. Records and now videos. But this came out, and an American guy was over there watching local television, and they're playing all these things on local television. Right. Things that couldn't come out before the Iron Curtain went down. So he recorded it and started selling it on the internet. $35 a pop, you know. And this person who told me about it, she said, should I get you one? I said, no. I said, you know. She said, well, I'll get it and make it for you. I said, okay. So that's how this came about.
Okay, let's watch a couple of minutes of this.
This is a composition by Duke Ellington, a Creole love call.
Okay.
Heather up, Mr. Jimmy Hawk on the drums. Mr. Steve Novosel on the bass fill.
What's that mean?
Composition by a very wonderful master of music, Mr. Duke Ellington.
See, Roland's playing 3 saxophones at the same time. He's got the tenor saxophone, another instrument he called the manzello, and another one called the stritch. keep going, Rusty? You want to fade it on
Sure.
out?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We're gonna
Just
fade
fade
down.
it on out.
Fade it down. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, that
Roland
was
Kirk. Just
one
phenomenal.
of the tunes.
Gosh.
You know,
That
it
was.
I think a 30 or 40-minute video. They recorded the whole set. You know.
Wow, he was just an incredible performer. Really deserves to be remembered. I saw him perform after he had a stroke, and he played better than most saxophonists out there with one hand, because he was paralyzed on one side, and it's just incredible in terms of his devotion to the music.
Well, in those days, unfortunately, the record companies and the critics labeled him a clown or a freak, you know. But listen for yourself. I mean, he was an unbelievable master of the saxophone, you know. But they didn't know what to call him, you know.
But we will continue to play his music on the radio, and
yes,
remember, now we got videos.
Yeah.
Great recording, the inflated tear.
Yeah, there were several videos after, after that year, you know, with different bands. I was with him for about 3 years.
What year did you leave him?
Right around 69, I guess,
Okay.
70, right around that time.
Okay, so let's take it up to the 70s.
Yeah.
You, in the early 70s, worked with Stanley Cowell and Charles Tolliver, a group called Music Incorporated. How'd that association begin?
Well, I knew Charles, spent some time at Howard University as well.
Okay.
And we met down here, and he was also good friends with Charlie Hampton at that time. And one thing I had been in New York, and I ran into Charles. He said, "Is your passport in order?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "We're going to Paris on Friday. Can you make it?" So there I went.
Okay.
You know? That was with Stanley and Jimmy Hobbs. And that group was actually,
Okay.
Check on your passport.
See now, at least there's
It's a
not
gig,
so many
right?
audience, right?
So that group was actually working Music Incorporated. There were different bass players, you know.
Okay.
But for this particular tour, he needed me, and I went. And I had just moved to New York very briefly, and here I was going to Europe, you know. And I spent a long tour with them over there, you know. We did a couple of records, one is called The Ringer, and one was called Blues for the Viet Cong, which was a trio record with Stanley and Jimmy and myself. And then we were associated for off and on for years through the 70s.
Sure.
You know.
Sure. You said you moved to New York briefly. How long did you stay up there?
Well, every time I try to stay in New York, I get a gig to leave New York.
Okay.
I'd go to Europe, you know. And in New York, out of sight is out of mind, you know. When you come back, you got to start all over again, you know. So I was doing that for a while, and I came back to Washington, you know.
So what made you decide to settle back in Washington?
Well, I really wasn't a decision, a conscious decision. I was getting work. I was with Ray Bryant for a long time.
Okay.
You know, during that time. And he was working in New York, you know, so I was in Washington. So it was back and forth. You know, I was kind of a road rat there for a long time. And with Charles again, and then I was with Anita O'Day for a while, speaking of singers.
Okay.
I spent several months, maybe close to a year, with her off and on. You know.
She was a real character, right?
Oh, yeah. Say that again.
What were some of the things about her that
No, I don't want no comment. She was a hard lady.
Yes.
She was a hard lady, but a great singer, you know.
Yeah.
A great entertainer, you know. And one of the few jazz singers, so to speak, you know. she never knew what she was going to do either on the bandstand, which was great, you know.
Yeah,
Keep it
sure,
spontaneous
absolutely,
and,
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now the '70s saw a couple of really unique jazz spots that had their musical careers kind of overlap in terms of performance. The One Step Down and Harold's Rogan Jar.
Oh yeah.
Places that you would play at frequently. Tell us about those spots and
Well,
the people you worked
the
with.
Rogan Jar was owned by a piano player in town who was also a psychiatrist, but a great lover of jazz, and he opened that club, you know. I think it was right off of Connecticut Avenue.
Right off of Connecticut on end.
Yeah.
Harold Kaufman.
Harold Kaufman. Yeah.
He was not only a pianist and a psychiatrist with an MD, he was also a lawyer.
A lawyer as well,
So,
yeah. But he loved to play.
Yeah.
He loved to play the piano, and he loved jazz, you know. And at that particular time and space, he was able to rent that place, I believe, because I think it was a church on top of the club. And he used to bring in so many people from New York, you know, and it fast became a place to play.
Absolutely.
You
In
know.
fact, I think I met Charles Tolliver from a gig he had there.
So many
And
people.
Eddie Jefferson, I interviewed Eddie Jefferson.
And I mean, that's where
Yeah.
Eddie Jefferson and Richie Cole kind of started to collaborate. And one helped the other, I guess, you know. But he also used to have a girl drummer by the name of Dottie Dodgy.
Sure.
Who, with her many contacts in New York, she helped Harold book people from New York, you know. So she was kind of the house drummer there for a while. And of course, a lot of local people, you know, Reuben Brown,
Sure.
you know, and Marshall Hawkins, people like that were all part of that scene, you know. It was a great club, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Great place.
Now the other spot I mentioned, the One Step Down, in the 60s and 70s, was a bar with a jazz jukebox. And it had the best jukebox in the city. I mean, it's just phenomenal in terms of the music and it was only, I think, after, or maybe simultaneous around the time the Rogan Jar was closing down, that they started bringing in live performances into the One Step Down.
Well, what happened, the guy who owned that club, Joe Cohn, his father owned a club in Georgetown.
Okay.
Where the Georgetown Mall is now. He had a little club there with the same jukebox that was ended up in the same church pews that were
the seats, right? Okay.
were seats. And he had this club. It was called B&J's, and it was like a biker bar. You know, I mean, I used to play in there for $5 a night. You know, with different people. You know, that's back when I was in the Army, too, during that time. And then, when the mall came, he had to move, and that's when he went into
It's where the One Step, right.
At the One Step, in Pennsylvania. Yeah. And that club, he didn't have music in there for a long time.
No, it's just a jukebox.
Just a
And
jukebox.
as a student, I used to go there.
Yeah, that's right.
In fact, Joe was a real character. He was something else. I mean, he was really tight. I was used to New York bars where you get a third drink back or whatever. And the only time he ever gave me a drink was when my daughter was born. But I told him that actually I first came into the club, I was underage because I discovered the place when I was 17 years old, you know, and just loved the jukebox. And he got upset. I mean, this was years later. You know, he was still upset about it. You know, it was like, and it was actually a woman who started working behind the bar, Ann Mabuchi, that started really expanding the booking.
Right.
You know, and
she was married to a guy who was part owner of Bradley's in New York.
Is that right? Okay.
And Ann was somewhat of an amateur pianist as well. And she came down to Washington and met Harold Kaufman And one thing led to another, and she kind of gravitated to Joe, and at the one step, and started convinced him to start bringing in acts. You know.
Absolutely. Well, it was awesome what she did in terms
Oh,
of
yeah,
bringing
she
in
did
the performers
quite a
that she
job
did.
there, yeah.
You know, it's like, I mean, I saw Benny Carter playing at the one step down.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, this was the level of the performance. Who were some of the people you played with?
Well,
there?
I was there with Benny.
Yeah, I thought so.
Matter of fact,
Yeah.
I remember that weekend because Benny came in and with in his tuxedo, you know. And the drummer who we had, who shall remain anonymous, he had on a jumpsuit, you know. It looked like and Benny told Ann and Joe, he said, "Look, I'm not playing with that drummer till he puts some clothes on."
Oh, jeez.
So he had to go home and change clothes.
Yeah.
I mean, Benny was quite a gentleman.
Oh, absolutely.
And, you know,
Jeez.
it was, you know, it was important for him, for the band to look good.
Absolutely.
You know?
Even in this dive.
That's right, even in this dive. I mean, I played with so many people, Sonny Stitt, James Moody, you name them. They all came through that club. Lee Konitz, Hank Jones, Barry Harris. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, you know.
No.
And that club used to go 4 nights a week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, you know, with named people.
With some great music.
Yeah.
And some real characters. There was one guy who owned the end of the bar, Staff Rosenborg. Staff was Swedish. Yeah. In fact, Staff would tell a story about when he was still a teenager in Sweden, and he was in Sweden for Duke Ellington's tour of 1939, where Alice Babs sang "Happy Birthday" to Duke on his birthday. Monday night, I played the interview that Ellington did in Sweden on his birthday, that I've used over the years on that. But the other thing was, Joe and Ann they were running it like it was the mom and pop corner store, and they'd be behind the bar fussing and fighting while the music's going on. You know, it's like.
That's right.
You know, they were like the old married couple, although they weren't in any kind of other than a business relationship. You know, it's like.
You mentioned Ellington, and you know, I was fortunate enough to spend some time with Billy Eckstein. He used to come to Washington every Mother's Day and play Blues Alley, you know. So B and Duke went back many years, and he used to tell stories. You know, you never knew if they were true or not, but they were great stories. And he would tell a story about playing. He was in Chicago, and about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, he gets this phone call at the room. The guy said, "Hello, William, is that you?" And B said, "Oh, I knew it was Duke." He said, "No, Duke, yeah, I'm here." He said, "Where are you at?" He said, "Well, I'm in Russia." "Oh." He said, "William, I have to ask you a question." He said, "What does that do?" He said, "Well, do you remember when you were with the band and the introduction you sang to Sophisticated Lady?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Did I write that?" and Eckstein said, "No, Duke, don't you remember? I wrote that for the band." And Duke said, "Well, eventually I would have." But Duke was quite a guy, man.
So how was it that it was just because he would be coming in to play at Blues Alley that he engaged you when he come into town?
He would always. I had played a couple of times with him in other situations, you know, but he had a piano player that was with him almost his whole career, Bobby Tucker.
Right.
Who his first job was with Billie Holiday, you know, and he stayed with B for 30, 35, 40 years, you know. And Bobby would do a lot of, when they would do special things, Bobby would always hire the band. you know. So Bobby and I were compatible, and he used to call me a lot of times, you know. But that's pretty much how I got the chance to play with Eckstein, you know. I thought he was one of the greatest singers, you know, alive, even today. You know?
Now going, another musician from that era that was prominent for many decades that you worked with was Red Norvo. How did that?
Oh yeah, well
how did that come about?
That was in like the mid-'80s.
Yeah.
Red Norvo and Tal Farlow, who was also a very famous guitarist. The original trio that Red had was with Charles Mingus, Red Norvo, and Tal Farlow. They were like one of the first pianoless, so to speak, groups, you know. So it was just vibes, bass, and guitar. And they were very popular in the late 50s, early 60s. And then, of course, Tal retired, and Red retired, and then he came back. He got sick of not doing anything. He started working again, and I met him here in Washington. And he liked me. He said, "I want you to come with me. I got some gigs." And okay. And they brought Tal out of retirement, and so it became the Red Norvo Tal Farlow trio. I didn't get any billing, but that was fine.
Okay.
And I spent about 7, 8 years with him. And we don't have that tape, do we, Rachel? No. We did a video for the Smithsonian back in the late 80s. It was part of a series that the Smithsonian was doing on jazz. They did Art Blakey Quintet, Art Farmer, several different bands, and it was like a series of maybe 6 video concerts. And we did a hour, I guess it was about an hour. The first half of the show was with just the trio, and then the second half, he added a singer who was a very famous singer from the West Coast, a lady named Mavis Rivers, who was good friends and kind of became a companion of Red's, you know, in his later years. And Norman Simmons played piano, and a drummer by the name of Mike Shepard, who was from Washington. But I spent many years with Red, you know, and Tal, you know. All over the world we traveled, you know.
What were some of the countries you played in?
Oh, we were all over Europe, you know, the Far East, you know, all around the country, all around the United States, South America.
Now, most musicians, when they're on tour, really don't have time to check out where they're at. Did you ever have an opportunity to really delve into something in some country when you were overseas and really get into it?
We were always moving,
right?
You know, you know, sometime maybe a week if you're lucky, but usually it's like 1 or 2 days.
Yeah.
You're moving, you know, 31 nighters. When I first went with Roland Kirk, my first gig was in Poland. It was 31 nighters, right? And I could not. They weren't able to afford for me to bring my bass, so they were going to provide me with a bass. So I played 30 different basses.
Oh my!
And I was a nervous wreck at the end of that tour, man. It was crazy, you know. But you had to do it.
You have to do it.
You know, you had to do it. I mean, we would play in school gymnasiums where it's 5 degrees below zero. And I'm standing there waiting, still don't have a bass, 5 minutes before the concert. Here comes a guy running up the aisle with the bass back. Here you go. I said, "What do you want me to do with this? It's firewood, man. Ain't nothing to play here." But I had to play it, you know. But those are things that, you know, that you run into playing, well, especially playing jazz music, you know.
How many basses have you owned in your career?
Oh, I've owned several.
Uh-huh,
You know, I don't know, maybe 10 basses
okay,
that came, you know, through my hands.
right.
We're always looking for the perfect bass, you know.
Mhm. Have you found it yet?
No,
Still
not
working on
really.
it?
But I have was close, as
Uh-huh.
close as I can get, yeah.
Mhm.
I've had the bass that I play on now for about 45 years, you know.
Okay,
And it's a bass that's, it's over 100 years old, you know. It's a bass that
Wow.
not on this particular tape, but we can play that tape.
yeah, why don't we play the tape that you want? Which
Can you put
performances?
the live in Zagreb with the duo, Joe Cohn?
So this is with guitarist Joe Cohn, the
This
son
is,
of
yeah,
the
Joe
saxophonist
Cohn
Al
is,
Cohn.
yeah,
Okay.
Is the son of the famous Al Cohn, who was a tenor saxophone player, if you all know your history.
Yep.
But Joe is an excellent guitarist who I met and played with when I was playing with a trombone player by the name of Al Gray, who was very popular in his day with the Count Basie Orchestra.
Okay, well, let's hear it.
Yeah, maybe we could play some of that. This was live in Croatia at a city called Zagreb.
The great Mr. Oscar Pettiford was a very famous bassist who did what he calls the Laverne's Walk.
Beautiful.
Yeah, well, I was able to take my bass with me.
Yes, how about that? Absolutely. And how is it, you know, in terms of transporting the bass and your concerns about?
Oh, well,
know what to
nowadays
do.
you can't take it on the plane physically. It's got to go in, you know, underneath the plane.
Yeah.
And it's got to be in a trunk, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's a risk you take. You never know. Once you get to the airport, it's in somebody else's hands, you know. You got to grease a lot of palms, you know, to make sure the bass gets to the airplane, you know, and inside the plane, and hope that it's secure in there. You know, you never know. You know, I mean, the trunks that they have aren't you know, accident proof. They could drop it, and you know, you could have problems. So it's just something you've got to deal with. You know. In the old days, you could you buy a half-fare ticket, and you buy a seat, and it goes right on the seat next to you. But now, with all the new regulations, you can't do it.
Right. Now, in terms of making a living as a musician, particularly in Washington, D.C., how do you balance up playing locally and also doing any tours that you may do with Larry Willis or with whomever?
Well,
how's
I
that
can
working?
balance it much easier now because there aren't that many gigs, you know. I mean, you know, I've been through what you might say the golden years of playing jazz music in this town, you know, and abroad and you know, in other cities in the country. A lot of the venues are dying out. There aren't that many places to present this music, you know.
Where are you playing now? How frequently do you play at different venues and where?
Well, I don't have steady work. I take it as it comes. You know, I still wait for the telephone to ring. You know, or I book some things in advance with different people. But it's slim pickings these days. You know, for a jazz musician of any caliber. You know, even the high-profile guys, you know, are having a rough time. You know, there used to be times when the name guys had their own bands, you know. Now, the guys that are still out there playing with names can't afford to take a band on the road. The expenses are just too high, you know. So they have to go and play with the local bands. Wherever they're going, they may have to go to Europe or wherever. But the promoters don't have the bucks to pay for them, you know. For them to make a decent salary, and if he's going to carry a whole band, there's not enough money, you know, just not enough, you know. Unfortunately, that's how it's become, you know. Although I've been to Europe, this last trip, I was in Italy in November with the band that I play with more often now is with Larry Willis.
With Larry Willis? Okay.
Yeah,
who's in that band with you, with Larry?
Well, we have a trio, or we have a quintet, depending on what kind of venues we're going to play, or who can afford the trio, or whether they can afford the quintet. We have a drummer from Norfolk, Virginia, Billy Williams, who's an excellent drummer. And when we have the quintet, we add the alto saxophone of Joe Ford and the trombonist Steve Davis, who are both great musicians and play with different. You know, everybody freelances on their own and wait for gigs when we could all play together. You know, which is not as frequent as we'd like for it to be. You know.
So you just did a tour in November. Where'd you go?
We were in. We went to Italy. We played in Bologna, Italy, Ferrara, Italy. They were festival type places, which really amounts to be playing in a club. And then we went down to Sicily and played a couple of dates down there. and finished up in Paris for 2 nights. But they were all clubs, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I like about Europe, wherever you play, there's always a grand piano, and it's in tune. It's not like that here, you know. I mean, you go to a lot of clubs here in Washington or in other cities, and you go into the club and you say, well, where's the bandstand? And the maitre d' will say, well, as soon as those people finish eating, it's going to be right here. We're going to pull that table out, and that's going to be the bandstand. So, you know.
Struggle. Now, you had some other clips here that you wanted to show.
Yeah,
so
well, there's
time.
another clip with David Fathead Newman.
Okay.
This was recorded at the East Coast Jazz Festival with David, of course, and UDC's own Alan Johnson playing piano.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Harold Mann. He could play a little bit of that.
Yeah. Okay. And how did you hook up with Fathead? How that?
Well, I hooked up with Fathead while I was playing with Roland Kirk.
Okay.
The guy who was producing Roland for Atlantic Records at that time, a guy named Joel Dorn,
Mm-hmm.
who also produced Fathead.
Okay. Yeah.
So Fathead was getting ready to do a record date, and he didn't have a bass player. So he said, Steve, why don't you make this date,
Yeah.
you know? On the record date was Blue Mitchell, a very famous trumpet player who played with Horace Silver for many years, Eric Gale, who was a very famous guitarist,
Sure. Yeah.
and a drummer who was part of the Atlantic stable, so to speak, Bernard Purdy, they call him.
Okay.
So I said, oh boy, I got a record date with Fathead, you know?
I'm sure that's awesome.
So I go to the studio, and the producer said, Steve, you better bring your electric bass too, you know. I said, oh man, just bring it. So I'm just meeting these guys, you know. So I get to the studio, and Fathead did not have things prepared for that date. So we're futzing around trying to find out what tunes we're going to play. So he was calling me bass. Hey, bass, play this. And he'd play a little line on the saxophone. I said, no, change it. Play this. You know, so he changed that one. So we finally got it together. And he said, now put the wood down and pick the electric up. I said, oh, man. I didn't want to, I call it a Chinese bass. I said, I didn't want to play that bass. You know, but that was in, you know, in the late 60s. And Atlantic was, you know, they had big hits with Aretha Franklin.
Sure.
And, you know, that was kind of a soul label,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And Fathead was a blues-oriented player.
Sure.
You know.
Years with Ray Charles.
Yeah, with all his years with Ray Charles.
Yeah.
So we finally do the record date, and I ended up playing electric bass on the whole record.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Captain Buckles. There it is.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it turned out to be a nice date, you know. Yeah.
Now, the clip we're going to show from the East Coast Jazz Festival is some years later. It's a good segue in many ways. The East Coast Jazz Festival was started by a wonderful singer by the name of Ronnie Wells,
Right.
who you worked with,
Yeah.
of course. And it went on for years, and after Ronnie passed away, nothing was happening until a couple of years ago. Now we have the Mid-Atlantic Jazz Festival, which will be occurring this weekend. So it's back in good form.
Right,
You know,
right.
so another opportunity for musicians to
Absolutely.
get engaged and working.
Yeah,
and
well,
stuff
Paul
like that.
Carr, who's a local, you know, tenor saxophone player here in the area and also an educator, has taken over that festival pretty much, you know, and he's been doing good things with it.
Absolutely.
The past couple of years.
Yeah. But this clip we're going to see is from the East Coast Jazz Festival with our own Alan Johnson on piano.
And,
Okay, let's do it. great performance.
Yeah,
It was really
that
fun
was
to see. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. What's it like working with musicians who just come into town and they say, I need a bass player, you know, so you're being pulled in at the last minute. How does that work out?
Well, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Hopefully it's, you know, it's on a recommendation,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
or, you know a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy, you know. And so, you know, you just never know how it's going to work out, you know. Hopefully you got the right chemistry, you know.
Has that chemistry ever been wrong? Has there anybody been really difficult to work with that you wouldn't want to do it again?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. But, I mean, there are some people that are a little bit more difficult than others.
Okay.
But it's artistic temperament, you know. You deal with it, you know.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
you know, I'm not going to punch anybody in the face. I know guys that would, you know, wouldn't take anything like that.
Sure.
Most musicians are pretty, you know, understanding and they know the situation, you know.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's hard to go into a strange town and pick up people who you're compatible with.
Yeah.
You know? That's part of the perils of not having your own band.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
Like I said, back in the day, you know, you aspire to want to go with Cannonball's band. Johnny Griffin's got a band.
Sure.
I heard
Yeah.
he needs a bass player.
Yeah.
So, you know, and those were learning grounds for young guys.
Absolutely.
You know, to come up
Yeah.
and play with these people, you'd learn so much. Now all those people, of course, are gone, and the ones that are left can't afford to have a band. So they, like I said before, they go out by themselves and they pick up. Sometimes they get lucky, sometimes they don't. You know?
DC's been home to a lot of great musicians like yourself over the years. Who have you really enjoyed working with regularly? Well, of course, Andrew's here,
Yeah,
so
well, he's my
continue
partner
with
in
that.
crime.
But who are some of the others that you really
Well,
felt
local.
good?
Well, I used to like to play with Lawrence Wheatley, and of course Reuben Brown. We were together for several years. You know.
Have you been in touch with Reuben? Have you talked to him lately?
Not recently.
Yeah.
No. Reuben kind of chose to be a little bit aloof and incognito since he had a stroke.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you respect that.
Sure.
You know.
Sure.
But,
Buck Hill just turned 85 the other day.
it's another great player.
Yeah, absolutely. Just phenomenal in
Yeah.
terms of the.
I used to play a lot in Baltimore as well, back when the Left Bank Jazz Society was in operation. Every Sunday, you know, they had
Oh, the concert at the
the
famous
concerts
ballroom.
at the famous ballroom.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I played there many times with an array of players, you know, from New York. I mean, that was like one of the most sought-after gigs for musicians in New York. Is, yeah, let's go to Baltimore. They like the audience. You go in there for 4 or 5 hours, $5. You could bring your own alcohol. They serve fried chicken there. And bakery goods, and you know, you could buy some records. Oh man, it was a great venue every Sunday. You can go there and hear Art Blakey's band on any given Sunday. You hear big bands like Dizzy's band, Stan Kenton, John Coltrane, you know, for $5. Can't do it nowadays, you know. And I mean, I played there many times, you know. I mean, Baltimore had a Buck Hill over there. His name was also a saxophone player. Andrew, help me. Mickey Fields.
Mickey Fields, of course.
he was Baltimore's Buck Hill and and Buck was Washington's Mickey Fields.
Sure,
They
sure,
were
sure,
Great saxophone players.
sure. Tommy Williams' dad, Whit Williams, also a good
Whit,
sax
yeah,
player.
absolutely,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Baltimore had, well, Albert Daly,
yeah, yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Albert Daly, I
Yeah.
mean, they had back in the day again, when they had the Playboy clubs, Baltimore had a Playboy club, and that's where Albert Daly and a bass player by the name of, he was also a mailman. Damn, I can't think of his name. And a drummer. They had a trio house group, 6-7 nights a week,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Playboy club. And then Gary Bartz's father had a club, the North End Lounge, which had jazz in there all the time. I mean, you know, a lot of those places are long gone, of course, just like here, you know.
But the scene still continues. People
Oh, yeah,
still
well-
aspire to be jazz musicians, and
Absolutely.
So you've put a lifetime into this. Any regrets about it?
None at all.
No,
I have no regrets.
No, it's been
I'd do it over again just the same way.
absolutely
You know.
okay. I'd like to open it up for questions from the audience if anybody wants to ask.
Oh, that was called a Creole love song or love call. Yeah, that's Duke Ellington.
Just one question I had. When groups fly overseas, you know, and they play at different venues in different countries, do they pay for whoever where you play and pay for the whole trip, or you have to pay your own fare, or what?
Well, it depends on who the agent is. If you go through an agent, you know, the agent is supposed to do all that negotiating with the clubs and the venues, you know, and the transportation and the hotels, and, you know, and then present you with a package, you know. Sometime it works, sometime it doesn't.
Yeah, Steve, what's
question
that, man? All right. What about composing, writing? Have you done much of that, or is that an ongoing process? And how's that going?
Well, I was never one to be a composer. I mean, I was always so interested in repertoire music, you know, which kept me busy all the time. I mean, just learning the repertoire, you know, of the masters. I wrote a few songs, but I don't consider myself a composer, you know. I like composition, and I respect it, and I study the masters.
Are they out there? I mean, recorded them, or are they available?
My songs? No, not yet.
I'm gonna consider that.
What are you planning to do? I know, have you ever recorded an album for yourself? And if you haven't, are you planning to do that in the future?
Well, I plan to put this video out, you know, this video that I did with the guitar player. I plan to put that in, because that's I've got 2-hour sets there, you know, but it's more than a notion, you know, especially when you have all compositions written by someone else. You know, there are legal things that have to take place, you know, and it could cost you some money just to get that intact before you even start putting the video out or the record, you know. But I've done collaborations with people, not anything necessarily under my own name, you know. But I plan to do that though with this video. Yeah.
Any of those, I see they got a lot of CDs, or, I mean, CDs that they pick it from on the screen there. Are any of those available?
All of those are available.
Huh?
They're all available. Those are
I
all
mean,
records.
to be sold?
All of them. Yeah. Talk to Andrew, he's got 45
All
of
of
them.
them. Where would you go? Where do you go? Just get online or what?
Well,
Oh, just
Yeah.
talk
he'd
to
give
him.
you,
Talk to
he's got
Andrew.
a catalog, I bet he has in his pocket. And he'll list all his records, how much they cost.
You mentioned that you said you're gonna make Bill
The video, yeah.
the guitar, you and the
Get
guitar.
me and guitar, yeah.
That's gonna be,
That's gonna be my next project, yeah.
you don't know how long that will be, I mean.
Unless you wanna make a donation.
I'd like to get it, you know.
All right, well, you have one, you have one.
That's why
Yeah.
I had another question. The question, we saw the Donny Hathaway album, and I just want to know, what was your relationship with Donny Hathaway,
Oh,
the
well,
pop
see,
artist?
that was another part of my life. That, you know, yeah, well, I met Donnie when he was going to Howard University here in town. And he was just moved here. You're from St. Louis, I believe he's from. And we used to play together a lot. We were compatible. And he's the one that got me into playing electric bass, you know. I played upright as well with him. But when he graduated from Howard, what's the famous group?
The Impressions?
Not the Impressions, the other guy, the other group.
Unifics?
You know, he went back to Chicago and was doing a lot of, he was doing a lot of record dates, you know, background for these vocal groups, you know. And the way he would get paid was they would give him studio time, you know. But I went out there with him and spent a lot, you know, made a lot of things out there with a lot of them I don't even know or whether they exist or not, you know. But we were in the studio a lot, recording a lot of his stuff, which I don't know if they ever came out or not. But I spent a long time with Donnie, you know. And then he, not to cut you off, but he also got hooked up with Roberta at that time, you know. And they made some, you know, big hits, you know.
Did you ever play at the Lincoln Colonnade? I don't know you. Back
No,
in the day.
that was a little, I got here in '61, so it was not in existence. I think it was gone by that time,
Oh, okay.
you know. There were a lot of clubs that I used to hear about when I got here. Olivia Davis's Patio Lounge. I didn't know those clubs.
Big band, they used to have a lot of big
Right. Yeah, that was a little before my time.
A lot of people don't know that the Lincoln Colonnade is under the Lincoln Theater.
Was underneath the Lincoln Theater?
Yeah.
Under the Lincoln
Really?
Theater.
Oh,
But a lot of people don't know that.
that's something. Wow.
You had a question, Michael? Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk on two sides of a topic, talk about teachers that you had, if you did. I mean, it seems like you sort of got thrown into the deep end, you know, with the Army, and then also talk about students that you have taught.
Oh, well, I was lucky in terms of, like I said, I made the transition from the trumpet to the bass musically, you know. I mean, I had to learn to get more familiar with the bass clef in terms of reading, you know, music for the bass. But the physical aspects of playing the instrument, you know, when I was working there at the Brass Rail, it was just a little beer joint, you know, and this guy came in one night. He said, you know, you sound pretty good. He said, but you need some lessons. I said, yeah, well, I guess I do, you know. Well, he happened to be a bass player in the Army band, and he played upright, you know. Well, to make a long story short, he took me under his wing. Today, this guy is the principal bassist with the London Philharmonic. Yeah, that's how. His name is Thomas Martin. He's the principal, and he got me my first bass sight unseen. He called me, he said, Steve, your bass is in Philadelphia at Fantoni's Violin Shop. Go and get it, $450.
Wow.
That's how I got my first bass. Yeah.
And then, I mean, over the years, you've been here at UDC for a number of years. Who are some of the people that, the bassists that you've taught?
Oh, I've had some very good players here, you know, that came and went. You know, Poindexter, Erica Poindexter, who was a great bass player, and her brother was a good bass player. You know, she came from a very musical family, and she could sit in my room and lean against the table and play Dragonetti, you know. Jeez. Like it wasn't nothing. But today, I don't think she even plays the bass anymore. She was a great musician, though, you know. And I've had others through the years. I can't just pinpoint them right at the moment, you know. This guy right there studied with me for a while. Really? Yeah. Yeah. But I love teaching. You know, I love the interaction, and I try to give my all and try to help you know, young people out best I can. I'm just hard upon them. I tell you that, but somebody got to be hard on you know.
Yes, sir.
Who do you listen to lately?
Oh, I
Any
listen.
new, any old? What moves you?
Well, it depends on my mood, you know. Sometimes I got a taste for Jimmy Blanton, you know, or Ron Carter, you know, or, you know, I mean.
Non-bass players, vocalists?
Oh, yes, I mean, I like to listen to John Coltrane, you know, Bill Evans, you know. Cedar Walton's one of my favorite piano players, you know. So it just depends on how the mood strikes me, you know. But I like to listen to the old and the new. You know, I don't like to I don't say, well, that's old jazz. Man, it's all, if it's good music. Duke Ellington said that. If it's good, you know, if it's good quality music, you don't have to put a label on it. It's good. It's either good or bad. You know? Yes.
Yes.
Do you like working with vocalists?
Oh, yes. Yes. I learned a lot from being with vocalists. Yeah. Yes, I love playing with vocalists. I played with many. You know, Anita O'Day, Shirley Horn, you know, Carmen McRae. Boy, females. Those are females, and Billy Eckstein, who I think is one of the great, Sarah Vaughan. I played with all these people at one point or another. Yeah. Could always learn something, you know.
Yeah. Andrew.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you publicly for inclusion of several of my albums.
Thank you very much. One of the greatest jazz musicians alive. Right
That's
there.
Andrew White. Andrew
You won't
White.
find a better one.
Boy.
That's my man. We've been friends for how many years, Andrew?
49.
49. 40, yes.
I knew you had the number.
We started playing together in September of 1963.
Boy.
Whoa.
Yeah. Yes,
Whoa.
a lifetime. Boy, that's going back some years.
I wouldn't change it, you know. I wouldn't exchange it for nothing in the world, man. I'd do it over again. If I could do it 10 times, if I had 10 more lifetimes, I wouldn't change it up. I love this music. I love the people that I play with, you know, and I feel very fortunate to be able to do this, you know, and make a decent living at it.
One question. How did you meet the great Calvin Jones? Well, I know your relationship with him was very close.
Yeah.
And you guys played all the time. Well, how did you meet him, and how did that relationship culminated over the years to where you guys were just very best friends?
I met Calvin when I was playing with Rick Henderson at the Howard Theater. Calvin was in that band, and I mean his partners in crime, you know, Herschel McGinnis, who you may not or may not know, and Harold Mann, who was a drummer on. Those guys were all part of that band, you know. And Calvin and I became very close friends then, you know. And through the years, you know, I was always on and off the road, so I didn't see him a lot. But I remember when UDC was called the Federal City College. Judy and I were just talking about that. Yeah. When he was, I mean, Calvin was a dedicated musician, educator, teacher, and just a great person, you know. I feel very lucky to have known him and been associated with him musically. He brought me up here, you know, he didn't want to see any credentials. He just said, I want you, you know, for what you do, you know. See, I don't have any so-called music degrees, you know. Well, you know, I went to the school of hard knocks,
right.
you know.
Right.
But again, I feel very fortunate, you know. I did go to school, you know, when I was in the Naval School of Music there, and I went to Youngstown University very briefly, you know. But most of what I learned about music and jazz especially were from other players, you know. I met Ray Brown in Prague, Czechoslovakia. I was getting on an elevator and going up to my room, and the elevator stops, and who walks in but Ray Brown, you know. And he looked at me, he said, you're a bass player, aren't you? I said, yes, sir, and I recognized him right away. He said, what room are you in? So I told him, 408, whatever. He said, I'll be up there in 10 minutes. I said, oh my God.
Yeah.
So he came up there, he played my bass. He sat there for 2 hours playing my bass, giving me a bass lesson. Wow. And tears were streaming out of his eyes. He said, Steve, I don't know if I'll ever be able to play this goddamn bass, you know. And that was, you know, I mean, we were friends from that point on, at 67, up until when he died. But he was a very dedicated, hard-working musician, you know. And that was the greatest bass lesson I've ever had in my life. You know, no school could have given me that. You know. I mean, school gives you other things, you know, but that practical, you know, like guy said, yeah, I've been to the Art Blakey School of Music, you know. But I learned from the musicians that I played with, you know, and asked questions. And what I didn't know, I asked, you know, tell me something. You know, I'm always looking for something to improve myself, some way to improve it. Because you'll die not knowing all the music.
That's true.
So.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
Yes, this was
Okay, sure.
even though you were a student at Howard, did you ever swing around with the swing masters?
Oh, that was the big band?
At Howard University.
That was, that was Mickey Taperza was the drummer, the guy that had the drum store,
Yes.
Drums Unlimited, and Fred Irby. They were like co-leaders. Yeah, I played with them a few times. That's when, did you know Kirk Stewart? He was a piano player that taught up there. Who was a great, just a great player with Sarah Vaughan. And, yeah. But, yeah, I used to go up there and play with that band every now and then. Yeah. Herschel was there. All the guys that are gone now played in that band. You know, so many of them. Yeah. Any more questions?
Are there any younger players coming up? You think people should know
there are so many. I mean, I can't keep up with everything that's going on. I mean, it's not so easy to go in record stores anymore because there aren't record stores. You know, and to buy and see what's the latest thing is now. You can't even do that. So I'm kind of out of touch with a lot of stuff that's coming out with the advent of the internet and all that stuff now. You know, it just kind of overwhelms me. But you know, I always try to, if I'm out playing in New York or somewhere, I try to go out and listen. Who's playing what? You know, where are the bad young guys at? You know, and they're, you know, a lot of times I hear them, don't know who they are. You know, but there are a lot of good musicians out here trying to play this music. You know.
It's really phenomenal seeing the young musicians coming up to make a career out of something they know they're not going to get very wealthy out of, you know. But the commitment to the music as an art form is just phenomenal, you know, to see young people just saying, hey, I want to do this.
Yeah. Oh, it's very difficult now. I mean, it's different than when I was growing up, you know. There was always some kind of work, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Once you got to a certain point, you go out and try to get a gig, you know. But it's hard to get what we call gigs now, you know. There just aren't that many venues, you know, and aren't that many organized bands either, you know. Or the guys that are playing music play it part-time. You know, I was dedicated to it, like a lot of my friends were during that time, you know. I wouldn't think about doing anything else, you know. It's about music, you know. But, you know, rent in those days was $60 a month, you know. Now, you know, it's astronomical. Yeah. You know, the economics just don't work out. You know, I wonder about a lot of young people coming out of schools, out of the music schools or in university, where they're going to go if they want to continue playing music. You know, it's somewhat of a problem. And it's hard to juggle that around, you know.
Yeah. Andrew's got another question.
Do we have any more of the ongoing jam sessions in D.C. like we used to have at the One Step Down?
The only one that I know about is over there in Northeast, HR 57.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it used to be down on 14th Street, and he moved over to 8th Street over there.
Right at 8th and H.
8th and H. Yeah.
What's
I haven't been there yet.
Columbia Station.
Well, that's somewhat of a jam session place, but HR is probably a little bit more organized, so to speak.
When is the one at HR?
See, Antonio Parker does things there.
When is
Wednesday night?
Well,
yeah.
it's almost like every night is a jam session there, because they don't necessarily, you know, he may hire a band for the weekend, maybe on a Friday and a Saturday, but he's open 7 days a week.
Yeah.
And
He's open a lot.
Playing.
The drummer just passed away. Junebug Jackson was the house drummer there. And one young musician that took my jazz history course at Georgetown, Braxton Cook, who's now at Juilliard, had his performance before he went up to Juilliard there with Junebug. You know, it does turn up an audience. People are coming out there to see the performances. But it's Antonio Parker, who just did a CD release of recordings he's done at HR 57, is playing there primarily like on Friday and Saturdays. But it's a mixed bag. Not like it was. In terms of musicians jamming. From a conversation that we had here a couple of months ago, Blair Rubel and I talking about his book, Washington's U Street, has us with another engagement. Tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock, we'll be talking about U Street and Black Washington at the Martin Luther King Library at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, if anybody wants to make their way to that. So in 2 weeks here, Maurice Lyles with Bill Brower. In March. Okay.
March 21st is
A month.
our next jazz
Okay.
forum with Bill Brower,
Can I get one more
Maurice Laus. Hold on, we can wait till after. And then in April, we'll have a panel discussion with John Hassan and two gentlemen from Smithsonian Folkways that'll be talking about projects that they're doing. Would you please join me in thanking Rusty Hassan and Steve Novosel?
Okay, thank you. Wow.
I would like to thank, I
Yeah.
would like to thank Miss Corey, especially
Oh, yeah,
Rachel,
yes,
Stu back there.
yeah.
These people are here,
Boy.
to make this thing happen. And Rusty, I
Well,
thank you.
thank
for-
you. Well, thank you for the
and
lifetime of
opportunity
music
to
that
talk.
you've done. It's been a real pleasure. It's been a real honor for me to converse with you
Well.
tonight. Thank you. Boy.
Okay. And thank you, sir.
Okay.
All right.
Great. Wow.
Yeah.
Your brother who's played the trumpet and played the bass on the wrong page.
Oh, his name was, his real name was Eddie Daniels, but he went by, he had a Muslim name, Saeed Rafiq Abdullah.
Great.
But
Well, thank you. Boy,
when he
it's
went
fun
with
to be able
Roland,
to see this without having to look
he
up
got-
with that
yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Nice. Oh, that was
Drug
good.
problem.
Thank you.
Great,
Enjoyed
thank
it very
you.
much.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
for coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, geez.
Yeah,
boy.
he's
Whoa.
good. I mean,
Jeez,
we
jeez,
came up
boy.
like that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really
Yeah.
do.
so much. It was
Yeah.
great.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah, geez, please, God. Hey, yeah, you can
Okay,
get one
babe.
with Steve in it, too. Yeah,
Oh, that's my water.
yeah. Hey, Steve,
Yo.
photo op, you can't miss this one.
Okay, excuse me.
Jeez.